The soft clatter of cutlery and quiet hum of polite conversation filled the lavish dining hall of the Briarwood Estate Hotel. It was a venue reserved for high society luncheons and discreet philanthropic meetings. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above white linen-covered tables, and the scent of freshly baked brioche floated in the air like perfume. Near the back of the room, seated alone at a small table near the window, was an elderly woman dressed in a plain navy coat. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, and she sipped tea with delicate, almost reverent motions. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, a widow who many believed to be just another quiet face in the background of town events. What most did not know, however, was that Eleanor was once a woman of deep joy, with a heart full of music and laughter. That light had dimmed the day her only son, Captain Daniel Hayes, had been killed in the line of duty during the most recent international conflict. He had served bravely, a decorated soldier deployed in the early stages of the Ukraine crisis. It was a war Eleanor had followed closely. But when the military funeral ended and the flags were folded, the world had moved on. She had not. Every Thursday, Eleanor came to this hotel. She ordered the same tea, sat in the same chair, and watched the same world bustle around her without ever truly noticing her presence. She had no one to talk to anymore, no grandchildren, no family close by. Her house had grown cold and echoing with silence. This place, this table, had become her only habit, her only connection to the world outside grief. That Thursday, however, something changed. A waitress, perhaps no older than 25, walked briskly between tables, her dark hair tucked into a neat bun, a notepad in hand. Her uniform was pressed, but her shoes were worn at the edges, and her knuckles chapped from hours of work. Her name tag read Emily. She approached Eleanor's table with a soft smile. It was a smile that seemed to carry some kind of unspoken weight behind it. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Would you like the usual tea?" she asked gently. Eleanor looked up, startled for a moment. She nodded. "Yes, thank you, dear." Emily returned shortly with the tea and placed it down with care. As she turned to leave, Eleanor noticed something that made her breath catch. A small pendant, barely visible beneath Emily's collar, had slipped out. It was an old military dog tag, worn and faded. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly. "Excuse me?" she called softly. Emily turned, curious. "That necklace, may I ask where you got it?" Emily hesitated. Her fingers brushed over the tag protectively. "It belonged to someone very dear to me," she said quietly. "I wear it to feel close to him." There was something in her tone, something so sincere that it stirred a long-buried ache in Eleanor's chest. "He was a soldier." Emily nodded. "Ukraine?" "Yes," she said. "He didn't come back." For a long moment neither woman spoke. Then Emily gave a polite smile and turned to continue her work, unaware that behind her Eleanor sat frozen, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. Because even in that brief exchange, something in Emily's voice, in the way she held that necklace, felt hauntingly familiar. Across the room, a table of younger women in designer coats and perfect hair sipped champagne and shared snide laughter. One of them glanced at Eleanor's table and smirked. "That old woman is back again," she whispered loudly. "Probably here for the free heat and sympathy." Another chimed in. "I swear if I hear her tell one more story about her dead son, I'm going to scream." Their laughter rang out, cruel and sharp. Emily heard it. She stopped mid-step and turned her head slightly. Her eyes flicked toward Eleanor, who was now visibly shaken, but Eleanor said nothing. She lowered her gaze to her tea, her lips trembling. None of them knew that Captain Hayes's mother was sitting right there, that her silence came not from weakness but from surviving a pain too heavy to speak of. And none of them knew what was about to be uncovered. Eleanor sat with her tea untouched, her hands trembling slightly as she traced the rim of the porcelain cup. The whispers from the other table still echoed in her mind, sharp and thoughtless. But it was not the cruelty that shook her. It was that necklace, that familiar chain, the way Emily had said he didn't come back. There was something in her voice that was not just grief. It was memory, love. Later that afternoon, as the crowd began to thin and the grand dining room returned to its usual hush, Eleanor quietly approached the front counter. Emily was there, wiping down a stack of menus. "Excuse me," Eleanor said gently. Emily looked up, startled. "Yes, ma'am?" "I hope you don't mind me asking again," Eleanor began, "but the dog tag you wear, is it from someone who served recently?" Emily hesitated. She looked around as if unsure whether she should speak. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "My husband, Daniel." Eleanor blinked, her heart stopped. She stared at the young woman, her mind racing. "Daniel Hayes?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Emily's eyes widened. "You knew him?" she asked. Eleanor could not answer, her breath caught. It was too much, too fast, too impossible. "I'm sorry," Emily said quickly. "I didn't mean to upset you." But Eleanor shook her head. No, you didn't upset me. I wasn't expecting—" Emily lowered her eyes. "I don't really talk about him much," she admitted. "People don't ask." Eleanor looked at her closely now, the shape of her jaw, the soft curve of her cheekbone. You said he was your husband?" Emily nodded again, slower this time. "We met not long before he was deployed. It was fast, but it felt right. We got married quietly, just the two of us at a courthouse. He didn't want to wait." Eleanor felt her knees weaken. She reached for the back of a nearby chair and eased herself into it. Emily moved quickly. "Are you all right?" Eleanor looked at her with eyes glistening with something that felt like recognition and sorrow. "I'm fine," she said. I never knew he married." Emily's expression shifted. You knew Daniel well?" Eleanor gave a small, almost broken laugh. "I raised him." Emily's breath caught. "No." "Yes." Eleanor's voice trembled. "He was my son." Silence fell between them. Emily lowered herself into the seat across from her, her hands covering her mouth. "I didn't know," she said. "He never got the chance to tell anyone. Everything happened so quickly. He said his family was complicated, that his mother, that you had already lost so much and he didn't want to burden you with more." Eleanor shook her head, tears now falling freely. "Oh, my sweet boy," she whispered. "He tried to protect me, even from his own joy." Emily was crying now too. "I had no one to tell," she said. "He was gone so fast, and I didn't know if you'd even want to meet me. I had nothing but that necklace and our son." Eleanor looked up. "Your son?" Emily nodded. "He's 4 now." Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest. "I have a grandson?" "Yes." Emily gave a small smile through her tears. "His name is Joseph. Danny wanted to name him after your father." Eleanor leaned forward and reached for Emily's hand. "May I meet him?" "Yes," Emily whispered. "Of course." They sat there in silence for a long time, the noise of the restaurant forgotten, the pain of years softened by a connection that neither had expected to find. Nearby, one of the women who had laughed earlier watched from her table. She nudged her friend. "Is that the same old woman from earlier?" "I think so. She's crying. Wonder what happened." Eleanor didn't hear them this time. Or maybe she didn't care. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. And for the first time in her life, Emily saw someone looking at her not with pity or impatience, but with understanding. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was just the beginning. Because everything they thought they had lost was about to return in the most unexpected way. The next morning, the sun cast golden streaks across Eleanor's living room as she carefully laid out a small plate of cookies and a pitcher of milk. Her hands were steadier than they had been in years. She hadn't felt this kind of anticipation since her son Daniel was a boy, but today it wasn't Daniel she was waiting for. It was Joseph, her grandson. A soft knock came at the door. Eleanor opened it slowly, and there they were. Emily stood holding a small boy's hand. He had light brown curls, big eyes, and wore a tiny red sweater with a dinosaur stitched across the front. He looked up at Eleanor with cautious curiosity. "Hi," the boy said. Eleanor smiled, her heart melting. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Eleanor. I'm your grandma." Joseph blinked. "I thought Grandma was in the sky with Daddy." Eleanor crouched down, eye level with him. "I'm here now. Would you like some cookies?" He nodded solemnly, then walked past her with a child's trust that was both innocent and healing. Emily followed, clutching her purse tightly, her eyes scanning the home. It was modest, but filled with warmth and pictures. On the mantel was a framed photo of Daniel in uniform. Emily stopped, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame. "I hadn't seen this one," she whispered. Eleanor looked over. "It was taken the week before he left. He said he had something important to do before he deployed, but he never told me what. Now I know it was you." They sat in the kitchen, watching Joseph munch happily on cookies, occasionally offering one to Eleanor's aging Labrador, who had made himself comfortable by the boy's side. For a while the conversation was soft, shared memories, laughter mixed with tears, but eventually reality returned. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," Emily said. "I was afraid. After Daniel died, I didn't know where to go. I tried to reach out to his old unit, but by then everything had been classified. No one would tell me anything. I had no proof." Eleanor nodded slowly. I believe you. And I see him in Joseph. That's all the proof I need. Emily looked relieved, but still uncertain. There's something else, she said carefully. I work 2 jobs to stay afloat. I'm not asking for help, but I want you to know I'm doing my best for him. You should never have had to do it alone, Eleanor said. Your family, you've always been. Later that afternoon, Eleanor took Emily and Joseph into town. She needed to run a few errands, and truthfully, she just wanted to spend more time with them. They stopped by the market, then walked through the town square. It was small, quiet, the kind of place where everyone thought they knew everything about everyone, which is why when Eleanor walked into the bakery with Emily and Joseph in tow, several heads turned. "Oh, look who's here," whispered a sharply dressed woman near the register, the widow with her charity case. Her companion chuckled. She's always taking in strays. Probably thinks she's saving the world. Emily heard it. So did Eleanor. Joseph, too young to understand, tugged on Emily's hand. "Mummy, are they talking about us?" Emily's cheeks flushed. She started to turn, to walk away, but Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No," she said firmly. "We're not walking away." Eleanor stepped toward the women at the counter. Her voice was quiet, but carried across the room. "You think you know who I am," she said. "But what you know is a fraction, and what you judge is a shadow." The women stiffened. Eleanor turned to the cashier. "I'll take my usual and 1 extra bear claw for my grandson." The word made both women flinch. Grandson. Emily stood frozen, unsure whether to be proud or terrified. Outside, Eleanor handed Joseph his treat. He grinned and took a big bite, powdered sugar covering his nose. "Do you get mean ladies in heaven?" he asked. Eleanor laughed softly. "Not if I can help it." They walked on, hand in hand. Emily looked at Eleanor with quiet gratitude. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay a while," Eleanor said. "Let me show you what Daniel would have wanted for you both." The day ended with a quiet dinner at Eleanor's home. Joseph played with an old train set in the living room, his laughter filling the halls that had once been silent. And though the world had once forgotten her, mocked her and dismissed her, Eleanor now knew that everything was about to change. Because soon the truth about who she really was and what she had built in silence would shake this entire town. 2 weeks later, the town of Havenbrook buzzed with excitement. The annual Hearts of Grace Charity Gala was approaching. It was the most glamorous event of the year, hosted at the elegant Fairmont Hall, a place known for polished marble floors, gold-lined ceilings, and a guest list full of socialites and benefactors. This year's theme was Giving with Grace, though most people attended more for the photographs and champagne than for the actual cause. Eleanor had not attended in years, not since her son had gone to war. But this year something changed. A hand-delivered invitation arrived with a velvet ribbon and a golden seal. It did not say Mrs. Eleanor Gray, it simply read, "The Founder." Emily helped Eleanor dress that evening. She wore a long navy blue gown with a delicate brooch at her collar. Her white hair was swept into a soft bun. Despite the years that had worn gently on her face, she looked dignified, like someone who carried something important. "You look like royalty," Emily said, adjusting Eleanor's pearl earrings. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Tonight I just want to look like someone who belongs." They arrived just as the sun dipped below the hills, casting a golden glow over Fairmont Hall. Expensive cars lined the valet area. Men in tuxedos and women in sparkling gowns stepped out and posed for photos. A red carpet stretched from the street to the grand staircase. Eleanor stepped out of a modest black sedan. Joseph held her hand tightly as they walked toward the entrance. Emily walked beside them, eyes wide. People began to whisper, "Is that her? I thought she passed years ago. I heard she lives in a little cottage now." Just as they reached the top of the stairs, a tall woman in a silver gown blocked their path. She wore a name tag that read Marla Jennings, chairperson. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Marla said with a polite but stiff smile. "General seating is at the west entrance." "I'm not here for general seating," Eleanor said. Marla blinked, then glanced over Eleanor's dress, her shoes, her cane. Her smile tightened. "Guests for the VIP tables have already checked in." Before Eleanor could speak, a young man in a dark suit rushed over. "See Mrs. Gray?" he said, clearly nervous. "We have been expecting you." He turned to Marla. "She is the reason this event exists." Marla's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The young man guided Eleanor, Emily, and Joseph inside. People moved out of the way. Some looked confused, others surprised. Whispers turned into stares. The grand ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers. Tables wrapped in white linen circled a stage at the far end of the room. The most elegant table sat closest to the front, labelled Founder's Table. Eleanor was escorted there with quiet respect. Emily and Joseph followed, still unsure what was happening. Marla stood in the back, now pale and clearly uncomfortable. Soon, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin tonight's auction, we'd like to recognize someone very dear to this organization. Eleanor shifted in her seat. For decades, this woman and her late husband supported this community in silence. They funded scholarships, helped rebuild the children's wing at the hospital, and yes, donated this very building. He paused, letting the room absorb the weight of his words. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Eleanor Gray, the founder of Hearts of Grace. Applause filled the room. Eleanor stayed seated, but Joseph stood and clapped beside her. Emily reached for Eleanor's hand, eyes brimming with emotion. Marla stood frozen in the back, her silver clutch clutched tightly in her hands. Eleanor finally rose to her feet. The room stood with her. People she had never met smiled at her with admiration. Later, guests approached to say thank you. Some apologized. Some cried. Emily leaned close to Eleanor and whispered, "You never told me you did all this." Eleanor looked down at Joseph, who was nibbling a cookie at the table. "I didn't need to," she said, "but tonight maybe it mattered that someone remembered." In that moment, the humble widow who once sat in silence was no longer invisible. She was honored, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to be seen. As the gala continued, the mood turned celebratory. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved between tables with trays of champagne flutes and tiny plates of smoked salmon. The charity auction was about to begin, with items like dinner with the mayor, a weekend at a vineyard, and an autographed football jersey up for bid. Eleanor sat quietly at the founder's table, sipping water. Her eyes wandered, absorbing the room's grandeur. She remembered the first time she and her husband visited Fairmont Hall, back when it was still an abandoned building full of broken windows and dust. They had dreamed of turning it into something that could give back. Emily, sitting beside her, leaned close. "I think people are finally starting to understand who you are," she said gently. Eleanor smiled. "As that was never the point," she replied, "but it does feel good to see it come full circle." At that moment, a waitress approached their table with a silver tray of desserts. Her name tag read Lacey, and she smiled warmly as she placed a plate of chocolate cake in front of Joseph. "Hope you enjoy it, little man," she said. Eleanor watched her with kind eyes. Lacey reminded her of someone, though she could not quite place it. Then she saw it. Dangling just below the collar of the waitress's uniform was a small silver necklace. The pendant was round, worn with time. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The same necklace. It was identical to the one she had given her son when he deployed to Ukraine. A simple silver disc engraved with a tiny anchor and the words, "Come home safe." Eleanor's hand trembled. "Excuse me," she said, her voice catching. "That necklace, where did you get it?" Lacey blinked, surprised. "Oh, it belonged to my late husband," she said, her smile softening. "He always wore it while deployed. After he passed, I kept it close." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "What was his name?" Lacey hesitated, then answered. "Matthew Gray." The world seemed to stop spinning. Emily turned, eyes wide. Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. Her heart pounded. I'm his mother," Lacey gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. "You're Eleanor." They both sat frozen, staring at each other as the sounds of the gala faded around them. Joseph looked between the two, sensing something was happening, but not understanding what. Eleanor slowly reached out and took Lacey's hand. "You're Emily?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. Lacey nodded, still stunned. "He told me he'd been estranged from his family. He never wanted to burden you. He thought if anything happened, I should leave you in peace." Eleanor shook her head, tears now flowing freely. "I searched for answers. I never stopped wondering. When the military sent me the flag and the box of his belongings, I knew something was missing. I didn't know where to look. I didn't even know you existed." Joseph's little voice broke the moment. "Mummy, why are you crying?" Lacey leaned down, brushing his hair softly. "Because you're meeting your grandmother, sweetheart." Eleanor let out a trembling breath. She looked at the boy, his wide eyes and sandy hair. He looked just like Matthew had at that age. Emily, no, Lacey, wiped her eyes and smiled. His name is Joseph. Matthew chose it, said it was the name of his grandfather. Eleanor covered her mouth. Her late husband's name, the one who taught her strength, who built everything they had. It was like a piece of him had returned through this child. The moment felt holy. Guests nearby turned to see what was happening, but no one interrupted. Some stood silently, watching the reunion unfold like a scene from a movie. Lacey sat down beside Eleanor, and Joseph climbed into her lap without hesitation. Eleanor held him tightly, her tears falling onto his tiny suit. In one night she had gone from being ignored to being celebrated. But none of that compared to this. She had found her family again, not through fame or wealth, through a necklace, through love, through a boy with his father's eyes and his grandfather's name. And suddenly Eleanor realized the gala, the applause, the recognition, none of it mattered more than what she held in her arms right now. The air in the room had shifted. Something quiet and deep had settled into the space, like the whole gala had finally exhaled. Emily, or rather Lacey, wiped the last of her tears, still holding Joseph close to her. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice held steady now. "I always wanted him to meet you," she said softly. "But after Matthew died, I didn't know how. I thought maybe it would only hurt you more." Eleanor shook her head slowly. Her voice was hoarse but strong. "No mother truly moves on from losing a child. We carry them with us every day, every moment, every breath." Joseph sat quietly in Lacey's lap, fingers playing with the silver chain around her neck. He looked up at Eleanor again with a smile that was so familiar, so heartbreakingly similar to Matthew's that Eleanor nearly gasped. "I want to tell him about his father," Eleanor said gently, glancing at Lacey. "He deserves to know the kind of man Matthew was." Lacey nodded, her eyes full of both sorrow and relief. "I want that too. I want him to know everything." Around them, the gala slowly resumed. Some guests returned to their seats. Others lingered near the walls, casting sideways glances at the table where something remarkable had happened. On stage, a new auction item was being announced, but the real story was unfolding quietly in that far corner of the room. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice lowered. "Why did you never tell me? Why hide yourself and your son?" Lacey sighed deeply, her voice catching a little. "Matthew and I had our share of struggles, especially in his last year. He was hurting and he didn't want to burden you with it. After he passed, I didn't know where I stood. I didn't want to come knocking on your door and cause more pain. And part of me, I think, was afraid you wouldn't want us." Eleanor's heart clenched. She reached across the table and gently took Lacey's hand. "You were never a burden. You were part of him. That means you are part of me." Joseph looked up just then, his expression full of curiosity. "Grandma, did Daddy like airplanes too?" Eleanor chuckled, tears still in her eyes. "He loved them. He once made one from soda cans and string when he was your age." Joseph's eyes widened. "Can we make one too?" Lacey smiled and nodded. "I think we can try." A few minutes later, a woman in a navy suit with a name badge that read Camille approached their table, slightly out of breath. "Mrs. Gray," she said, "we're nearing the end of the auction. If you would still like to say a few words, the microphone is yours." Eleanor looked at Lacey, then at Joseph. She hesitated for just a second. "I think we should both go up," Eleanor said. Lacey blinked. "Me? I'm just a waitress. I wasn't supposed to be part of this event." Eleanor met her eyes. "Your family and your story matters too." Camille offered to watch Joseph. He stayed at the table, happily working on a napkin with a borrowed pen, humming quietly as the two women walked toward the stage together. The crowd watched them curiously. Eleanor took the microphone first, and the applause was respectful but uncertain. No one expected a speech from her, and certainly not from the young waitress standing beside her. "I want to tell you a story," Eleanor began, "about memory, about sacrifice, about the kind of love that lives on long after someone is gone." She spoke of her son, Matthew, of his military service, his struggles and his death, of the pain she had carried since then. Then she turned to the audience once more. "And I want to introduce you to someone very special, my daughter-in-law and the mother of my grandson." Lacey stepped forward, visibly nervous, but held the microphone with both hands. "I know many of you probably didn't notice me tonight," she said softly. "I served your food, filled your glasses, and cleared your tables. Some of you smiled. Others didn't see me at all. That's okay. But tonight I found the one person I needed most, and she found me." There was silence. Then slowly, Applause began to spread across the room. People stood, some wiped their eyes, and Eleanor and Lacey stepped down together, hand in hand, their lives stitched back together not by charity or money, but by truth, forgiveness, and something deeper than both. The quiet of the small-town diner was broken only by the occasional clatter of dishes and the soft hum of conversation. Eleanor sat frozen in her seat, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the necklace around Emily's neck, her breath caught. That pendant, it was unmistakable. "Where did you get that?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. Emily looked down, then placed a protective hand over the necklace. "It was a gift," she said quietly. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice a little more firm. "That is not just any gift. That belonged to my son. I gave it to him before he was deployed." Emily's eyes filled with tears, her lips parted, but the words would not come. She seemed torn between fear and guilt. "Please," Eleanor said, her tone softer now, almost pleading. "Tell me the truth. How do you have my son's necklace?" Emily looked around the room. A few patrons had turned their heads, sensing something unusual. She'd glanced at her manager, who was still in the back, then finally sat down across from Eleanor. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she said. "It wasn't supposed to be this way." "What do you mean?" Eleanor's voice cracked. Emily took a breath, then looked Eleanor in the eyes. "Your son, Thomas. He was the father of my child. I'm his wife." The words hit Eleanor like a thunderclap. She blinked, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. "You're what?" "I was his wife," Emily repeated. "We got married in secret before his last deployment. He didn't want to worry you. He said he would tell you when he came back." Eleanor's heart pounded. She remembered the last time she had spoken to Thomas. He had been full of excitement, saying there was someone special he wanted her to meet after he returned. But he never did. He was killed before he got the chance. "I have a grandson," Emily said, her voice breaking now. "His name is Liam. He's 6. I wanted to tell you for so long, but I didn't know how. I didn't know if you'd want to see us." Eleanor's hand came up to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "All this time, all these years, and no one told me." Emily nodded. "I tried to reach out. I sent letters, but they were returned. I came here hoping to work enough to support Liam and maybe find a way to tell you." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "I've been alone for so long. I thought I lost everything." "You didn't," Emily said gently. "You have a family. You have us." Eleanor looked at her. This young woman, this stranger, who was suddenly not a stranger at all, had been carrying the memory of her son in silence, raising his child, trying to survive. "But why didn't you just tell me from the start?" Eleanor asked. "I didn't think you'd want me around. After the way the manager treated you today, the way people look at me here." Emily lowered her gaze. Eleanor's expression hardened. "That manager embarrassed me in front of the entire diner, and yet you still came and served me with kindness." Emily said nothing. Eleanor straightened up. "That changes now. No one humiliates my family. Not anymore." Just then the door to the kitchen opened and the manager walked out, wiping his hands on a towel. He saw Emily seated at the table with Eleanor and frowned. "What do you think you're doing, Emily? You're on shift." Eleanor stood slowly, her eyes locked on the manager. "She's talking to her mother-in-law." The manager blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me, and I think you owe her a lot more than a paycheck." The manager looked confused, then uncomfortable. Eleanor turned to Emily, her voice calm and steady. "Finish your shift. I'll be back later. We have a lot to talk about, and I want to meet Liam." Emily nodded, her eyes wet again, but this time with something else. Relief. Hope. Eleanor walked out of the diner into the late afternoon sun, her heart heavy but full for the first time in years. Her son may have been gone, but part of him had lived on, and now so would she. The following day the town buzzed quietly under a soft grey sky. Eleanor stood in front of her mirror, brushing her silver hair, her thoughts swirling like the clouds overhead. For years she had wandered through life with a hollow ache. Grief had dulled the colours of the world around her. But now something had shifted. She picked up a small picture frame from her nightstand. It was her favourite photo of Thomas, smiling in uniform, taken just weeks before he left for his final deployment. Her fingers brushed over his face. "I found them," she whispered. Later that morning, Eleanor made her way back to the diner. As she stepped through the door, The quiet chime above caught the attention of several patrons. The same hostess from the day before froze when she saw Eleanor enter. The memory of her cruel comment still lingered in Eleanor's mind, but she didn't let it show. This time Eleanor didn't sit by the window. She walked directly toward the counter where Emily was refilling a coffee pot. When their eyes met, Emily set the pot down and walked over quickly. "Hi," she said softly, unsure if it was really okay. "Hi," Eleanor replied, her voice warm. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a small worn envelope. "I found this last night. Thomas wrote it before he left. It was addressed to my future family. I think it belongs to you and Liam now." Emily took the envelope with shaking hands. She didn't open it right away. She held it close to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Eleanor looked around the diner, then lowered her voice. "Would you be willing to come to dinner tonight at my home, you and Liam?" Emily's eyes widened. "Yes, of course." "Good," Eleanor smiled. "It's time we stopped living like strangers." Just then the manager passed by, pretending to check receipts, but his ears clearly caught the conversation. Eleanor turned to him, her expression serious but calm. "You owe Emily an apology," she said. The manager stopped, stiffened, then forced a tight smile. "Is there a problem?" Eleanor stepped closer. "There was, but it's being fixed. I'd like you to treat her with the respect she deserves from now on." The manager looked at Emily, then back at Eleanor. The power dynamic had shifted, and he could feel it. "Yes, ma'am," he muttered, before walking off. Emily covered her mouth to stifle a surprised laugh. That evening, Emily and Liam arrived at Eleanor's cottage just after sunset. The little boy stood nervously at the door, holding a bouquet of dandelions he had picked himself. Eleanor opened the door and knelt down. "You must be Liam." He nodded, looking unsure. She smiled gently and reached out her hand. "I'm your grandma." The boy looked up at his mother, who nodded through tears, then slowly placed his small hand in Eleanor's. Inside, Eleanor had cooked a simple meal. As they sat together, laughter began to fill the space between the clinks of silverware and the soft hum of an old radio. The cottage, once filled with silence and memories, now echoed with warmth. After dinner, Eleanor brought out an old photo album. She showed Liam pictures of his father as a boy. Emily listened closely, her eyes lighting up at the details she had never known. She hadn't just gained a home for her son, she had found the missing pieces of the man she had loved. As the evening drew to a close, Liam leaned against Eleanor, already half asleep. Emily reached for him, but Eleanor gently cradled him instead. "Let him rest a little longer," she said. "He's safe here." Emily nodded, tears threatening again. Eleanor looked across the room and whispered, "You gave me a piece of Thomas back. I can never thank you enough for that." Emily looked down, then quietly replied, "He would be so proud of you." And in that quiet room, filled with new memories and old stories, a broken family slowly began to heal. The weeks that followed were filled with moments Eleanor had once thought she would never experience again. Early mornings with the scent of coffee and the sound of Liam's laughter echoing down her quiet halls. Afternoons spent gardening with Emily, where silence was no longer painful but peaceful. Evenings with photo albums and stories of a man they both loved. The loneliness that had wrapped around Eleanor like a heavy shawl for so long had started to lift. She no longer drifted through her days. Now she moved with purpose. Word of what had happened at the diner spread quickly through the small town. People who had once whispered behind her back now greeted her with warmth. Some apologized. Most simply treated her with a newfound respect, unsure how to face the truth that the woman they had dismissed had given more to their community than they ever knew. At the next charity fundraiser, Eleanor returned, but this time she brought Emily and Liam with her. They were no longer hidden parts of her past, they were her present and her future. As they stepped into the large hall where the event was being held, a hush seemed to fall over the crowd. People turned, recognizing the woman in the elegant blue dress and silver hair. Some saw the child holding her hand and the young woman beside her and tried to connect the pieces, but Eleanor did not need anyone's approval. She smiled, steady and proud. Near the back, the same hostess from the diner stood, frozen in place, drink halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened as she realized who the woman beside Eleanor was. Eleanor met her gaze, gave a polite nod and moved on. The woman lowered her eyes in shame. Later that evening, a speaker took the stage to offer thanks to the generous donors who had made the charity's new community centre possible. I would especially like to acknowledge the anonymous benefactor whose donation fully funded the construction of this very building, the speaker said. Tonight, I am honored to reveal her identity with her permission. All eyes turned toward Eleanor, who stood gracefully, her presence commanding the room. I made the donation in my husband's memory, she said, her voice strong and unwavering. He believed in building a better future, one where no child would grow up feeling alone and no woman would be dismissed because of her appearance or her past. A long silence followed, then applause began to rise, quiet at first, then growing louder. People stood. Some wiped away tears, others looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. When the evening ended, Eleanor, Emily and Liam stepped outside into the cool night. The stars above sparkled, unbothered by the noise of the world below. Liam tugged at Eleanor's hand. "Grandma," he asked, "can we come back next year?" Eleanor smiled. "Of course we can. Maybe next year you'll be the one up there giving a speech." He laughed, swinging their hands together. Emily stepped closer. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Eleanor turned to her, her heart full. "No," she replied. "Thank you. You gave me back a reason to hope. You brought me home." The two women stood in the quiet of the parking lot, watching the lights of the gala fade behind them. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the warmth of a family she thought she had lost, and Emily, once alone and afraid, had found a mother not by blood but by grace. Their bond, born of grief, now held something stronger, a shared future. And as they walked toward the car, with Liam skipping ahead, Eleanor glanced upward. "Thank you, Thomas," she whispered to the sky. "You brought us together." And somewhere beyond the stars he was smiling.